Welcome back to Capturing the Intangibles. We have a fun topic around process intelligence where we try to clearly define the purpose and benefits, but also why this and other tech areas are subject to acquisition in today's market, and whether this is a trend someone can get ahead of. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Capturing the Intangibles. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, good, Rick.
Good. We were waiting for Mike. He's late all the time, but for the rest, we're good.
Yeah, and that's normal. And he was on vacation, and it sounds like he's still on vacation. So anyways, Mike, good to have you back. Today, we wanted to dive into a topic that's really growing, not just amongst our group, but something that we're hearing more and more in the market as companies are being purchased up or people are expanding into different areas. But I wanted to talk about the world of process intelligence, right? And I think the first way I'd like to start is, Massimo, let's start off with you. When we say process intelligence, how would you define it, and what is the actual opportunity?
Yeah, so process intelligence is actually not new as a concept, but of course now we have all kind of good technologies, and we can do it really much better than before, right? Before, people try to do business intelligence and decision support, but it's really, it ended up to be more BI projects. What we mean with process intelligence, we mean actually, I call it 3 layers, and I'll go on, today we have the board together. I'm going to draw that in a moment. So we mean 3 layers. So first is what people call business process definition. So you really define your business processes, in your specific industry for your specific company. You laid out what are the best practices and the processes. And the processes goes from different departments, different roles, different input and outputs, and that is what you will define. Then when you go and implement a product, you want to use these best practices and implement that into the product so that the execution of those processes are done in the way you have defined it. And then the third layer is, once you run it, you collect all the data, you want to see, what the bottlenecks are in the business processes. And of course, you want to improve those bottlenecks, but not only per se just seeing a dashboard, but you want to automate it back in the execution system and make sure that, you clear up all these bottlenecks.
So Massimo, when you describe it like that, take the bottlenecks and sort of what I'm understanding is the tracking side, right? Like how are things progressing throughout that process? When you say business process and the best practice, how is that any different than what traditionally we call as BPMS, right? Or traditional automation engines as we know them today?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look a little bit on the whiteboard. So you can divide these domains. I was talking about more like let's say a pyramid, right? At the bottom, you have your business process management, but more the definition of it. I call it the D, right? And then you have in the middle the system that execute that. So it's a business process management, but then the execution. And then we have the business process mining, right? So that's the tracking. So the difference is that the world, in the software world, we have all built all kind of software that does the execution, right? Workflow engines, integration engines, hard-coded business logic in the ERPs, in the CRMs. But those are the execution engine. But those definitions, when you put up a workflow, like how do you approve a PO? That's done directly in the execution system. That workflow process. It's not done from a best practices. What you see on the below, on the pyramid, where you say, in my industry, we're gonna run our processes in this way. We're gonna do the approvals in this way, and then you take those definitions in the execution system, and you will really run like that. So what you have, in the process intelligence, what the biggest challenge is that these two worlds are completely disconnected. Those are disconnected worlds, right? So if people says, but I have a business process management execution system, that's true, but that's not connected what the best practices, what the world of in the business process is defining. That's not connected to that world.
When you say best practice, do you mean do you see it as a company specific best practice, or is it industry best practice, or what is it really?
It's a really industry in the industry specific best practice. And of course then you go by country and then by specific company, but I would say 60-30-10, right? So I think that 10% probably is company specific. I think a lot of them are really best practices. And so when you have an order to cash that you define here at the bottom, or a procure to pay, or a hire to retire, those are your business process for the specific industry. Automotive has a different process than a distribution, right? Or healthcare. But you can document that in a process library, right? But how do you make these definitions, these processes, to go into an ERP or CRM or your workflow system or your integration platform? How do you make this best practice to become executable in your business application? That has been so far, even today, the biggest challenge, to map the world of definition to execution.
Well, and I can imagine too, as we've seen some of these, and I'm still thinking from the BPMS side of this, is that there's a conflict between automation and some of the manual aspects of this. Where are we in the process intelligence scope here? Is it mostly manual? Is it completely automated? Or is it a combination of both?
No, it's a combination of both. So some processes are manual and some processes are automated. Depends on the sophistication of the products and the platform. I would say that when you run a business process, the complexity comes, Rick, also where if this order to cash is done by one application, probably the sophistication it's okay. It's one application. If the platform for that application it's a good platform, you probably have a good tools to do that execution. The complexity comes when a vendor may come with multiple applications, business specific or industry specific, or a CIO has a landscape with multiple type of application with multiple vendors. Then you have a real issue there. The thing is, while you define the process in a standard like business BPMN 2.0, you can define the business process with BPMN tools. The fact is that every execution system, they have their own proprietary engines, right? And so, and if you have one, it's okay to map from a standard to a proprietary engine. But if you have multiple applications, now you have to map all these standards to multiple engines. And that is a tough job to do. It's a really, really tough job to do.
As you guys are talking about this, in context of your question, Rick, because I think that's interesting, I think there's a missing link piece here that people may gloss over, not necessarily recognize here too, because I completely agree, Massimo. So Rick, you're asking, we're talking about process execution, we're talking about, integration tools and BPMN, and then how do we get to process intelligence, or really what is it? And I think it actually helps to build a mental model of, what Massimo is alluding to right here, right? We understand business processes. So order to cash or order fulfillment, order to delivery, and so on. And then we implement systems that actually execute that business process. Now we're asking, what's process intelligence? Well, we need to take a step back and think about, yes, we're executing these subtasks as part of an overall business process, but we're not actually mining the details, the effectiveness and efficacy of each one of those steps that contributes to that process. So you actually have to mine information about the actual process itself. For example, for delivery or fulfillment, or when you're picking something off the shelf, as part of order fulfillment processes, how much time did it take for a picker to find the widget, the part, grab it off the shelf, put it in a box, pack it up, and so on. You start mining that information. Now you have a very rich complementary set of data that maps your business process. And that's, where I think you can start to layer in process intelligence, which is really just a way of, I think, narrowing people's focus. It's a subset of business intelligence at the end of the day. It's BI, but it's about processes, right? How effective are we in actually executing these processes and these tasks now that we have the data to support understanding what we're actually doing in the business?
Yeah, and the difference, Mike, it's a very good point. But the difference, what we had in the past, we only tend to put, like business data in a kind of data warehouse and do, a dashboard. But we know that the business process is not fulfilled only by applications. It can be fulfilled by people, manual. It could be unstructured, could be documents, it could be even chat conversation. If you have, like an activity feed application, where if I have to, if I get something to approve, but before I approve it, I may use a chat session with my, my colleague in finance to check, hey, is this good to approve? And then the person will say, yeah, go ahead, we have a budget, and then I go approve. In the business process, they will capture that I got an acquisition or an invoice and I have approved it, but they never capture that conversation around approving this invoice, right? If it was good or not. So now that we have the technology to really have structured and unstructured data together, the problem then is that a data warehouse technology isn't really maybe the best technology, and that's why now in the cloud people have data lakes. I put here on the board. Now we can capture all the data, regardless if it is structured or unstructured. We have that in a data lake. But then the other difference is that we don't want as a UI a classical BI dashboard. So what we want then, and people are really missing a lot on this point, we want to depict the same process that I define on the bottom. Now I want to see the process on the top. And then imagine you have like a VR or AR glasses. You put, your Google glasses on it. You see the same process as you define on the bottom, but now you put these glasses on, and all of a sudden you start to see all kind of red lights, bottlenecks, issues, exceptions, or green lights like, okay, it's good, or orange, right? So all of a sudden you have an augmented reality of the process, and you see what's happening. And remember that that's still reporting, right? So it's just a different UI. But that is where I think that people use BI for that. That wasn't really, either you didn't have a good structure in the data, you didn't have a good, data architecture, and you didn't really build a good UI visualization. That's what I've seen in the past. And I think that's now the opportunity to do.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because BI, you're reporting on outcomes of processes, but not the processes itself. You're reporting on how many things did I sell, how many orders did we put in place, how much revenue are we generating. But there's also so much process that is personal, human, system-based, and so on, that you're not actually monitoring, but you're just monitoring the outcome, aggregating that in a database or in a relational system, and then saying, here you go, slap, here's a KPI that says how your business is doing, right?
Yeah. And the key, I think Rick will love this because he's very passionate, but the key is, how do you find the anomaly in the business process? So if I put my AR, VR glasses, like my Google glasses, how do I find that anomaly? And in the past, maybe it was something hard-coded or a rule engine, but now we have machine learning, right? So we have this vast data of the entire business process in a data lake. I can really go and do a targeted, anomaly detection and put that in the UI, right? So that is another big, advantage of today versus, in the past.
So Rick, I'm kind of curious, bringing it back around, but I actually do have a question here, because we started straight into the process intelligence piece. But now that we're kind of a couple of steps into this conversation, actually, kind of curious for your perspective. We've had BI, business intelligence reporting, for so many years here. Actually, what's the difference and what's the value of process intelligence separate from BI? Why should people be paying attention to it? Or what do you think is the biggest impact, and actually why this is something that should be something people are investigating as part of their decisioning process, or investigating ways to be more competitive with respect to their business processes?
Yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head when it comes to business data. Is very static. It's finite. When it happens, right? But you have no other details around that. So one order from one company may look the exact same. Maybe this price point's exactly the same or whatever. But what went into it behind the scenes, as far as what that sort of intangible cost might have been, or how can I deliver quickly? How can I differentiate my business? That could be so wrapped up in the, again, intangibles around my systems, right? It may not be a system overload. It could be that, I've got this manual process to where some trend happened and 10 of my employees were out for 2 weeks. Think about it in like a COVID landscape too, right? If you could distinguish between what is a problem and what isn't, and how that's wrapped into your process, I mean, that there's a ton of business value in that. But as Massimo, as you were building this out, right, it's becoming very clear to me that historically there are providers that do each individual one. And I think we're answering the question that I had next, which was, why is there such a run on buying this sort of technology, on buying up these types of providers? And well, let me let you answer, and I want your perspective.
My idea is there are two reasons. Now we have the technology to really do really good process mining, and the companies that have figured it out, they are very interesting, in the market. That's for sure. It's also interesting to see, Rick, that RPA vendors are jumping on process mining as well, and process intelligence. And I know that you love RPA vendors or RPA, but because at the end of the day, RPA, it's all about, at least, what the word says, is about automation. So if you find anomalies in a business process and you want to correct that in an automatic way, then that would be a good fit for an RPA vendor to have that capability, right? But if you want that automation to be executed, you need also to find out what the process is, or maybe you need to be the tool that defines the process. So you're going down to the stack as well on the automation. They started like, I fixed some processes, but then they want to see the mining and the definition. The interesting part of this area, that there is a lot of segmentation still. If we go back to the pyramid, well, SaaS vendors may be here, right, with their execution systems, and you have process mining and definition. There are really vendors in this area and vendors in this area, right? There is very few that have both very good capabilities in both areas, right? That's really, and what I'm seeing is there is a consolidation, right? People are starting to get both sides of the equation plus the RPA model, the RPA capabilities as well. So, but I think companies needs this capability, going back to your question, because still, we want, operational excellence. Everybody wants operational excellence and wants to be the best and beat the competition, right? And process mining is one of the tools to give you that better operational excellence than before, with a data set that you didn't have before. And I think is for other vendors that may have, I would say traditional customer base, maybe on premises, and they want to move these customers to newer versions, or maybe even the cloud. They need to really document all these processes in such a way that they can map to what they used to run, how they used to run in the past, and they can map now how they can run in a modern way, right? And that it is not so only the deployment of a software cloud versus on-premise, but maybe the industry has moved to new practices, right? So you need really to be upfront and document and move the documentation to a real definition and execution as fast as possible. The pace is much faster. So if there are changes, you just go back to the definition, you change the process, and you publish it, and you now start to execution.
Hey, Rick, you know what I'm flashing back to? I can't remember which episode it was, but we were talking about what's the future of data and what are some new application domains that we expect in the future. And one was business simulation software. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what Massimo was kind of alluding to, that sort of digital enterprise, or that enterprise digital twin sort of concept, where you can actually start to model like all these different moving chess pieces when you understand your process, that you can actually simulate what's the best course of action for any other future given process or decision, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if we have all the data and you learned and you have the industry best practices, next time you go and do an implementation, you can even simulate to the customer how those processes will run for that industry, that specific customer, because you have all the data. In the beginning, maybe you won't be able to do an accurate simulation, but later, absolutely. No, I haven't seen nobody doing that business process simulation and give an accurate feedback to the customer, like, hey, you're gonna run into these bottlenecks, but we'll get there.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. It does feel like it keeps going back to previous topics. And I know I rolled my eyes at the RPA discussion, but it's actually no different than what we're talking about here. When I say no different, you're blurring the lines between integration, automation, and what we're just going to call best practice or your definition here, right? What we're fundamentally saying is it's not good enough to have one anymore. There's always more value, and that's what, as software becomes more and more mature and as organizations have to be more nimble and flexible, they need the complete solution, right? RPA is the same way, regardless of how you define it, whether it's on the traditional side versus full back-end process automation with intelligence woven in, right? That complete pyramid, as you've created the analogy here, that's why you're seeing companies buy this up, because they're realizing that, dare I say, a platform is more important than, say, having 15 services that I'm having to manage myself and figure that out, right? I don't want to have to take the on-premise world of my business practices or trying to figure out how I'm doing all these things manually. I don't want to have to lift that to multi-tenant cloud thinking that I'm going to get this great savings because I'm not owning the hardware anymore, when really the management and overhead is the same. That TCO has to be low. TCO can't be low unless you've got these things connected together. So I know we're talking about process intelligence here, which is the very top, and there's vendors out there doing that. I would honestly say you can't do that really well without the other pieces, and maybe vice versa. But that's why we're seeing this run on this technology now.
Yeah, but actually, I know that you hate RPA, but their strategy now to say, I'm buying process mining tools, I'm seeing RPA vendors buying API gateways. That actually confirms what we are saying throughout all the podcast episodes, that a wired platform has a lot of value to corporation, because they come with an end-to-end solution from a technology perspective. And unfortunately, a lot of executive software executive maybe don't get that value yet, but you see the market going into wired platforms, right? So end to end. And my prediction even is that RPA vendors will buy compliancy tools, because here is the deal, right? So I can define a process, I can have an automation, right? Now I can do process mining and maybe process definition. But the biggest challenge also is, where, back to your question, why do you do this? It's also for process compliance or in general compliance, because you can get an auditor and you can hand over a bunch of PDFs and say, this is the way we are running, where we have documented the processes. But in reality, when you go to the system doesn't reflect, isn't configured and doesn't reflect the way you run it, or the way you run is different than the way you defined. And there you go, your compliance. So the next step for RPA vendors or vendors that are consolidating capabilities is not only to have API gateways or process mining, they're probably going to have big data solutions and a compliance solution, right? Along with the ML. And you see this wired platform where we are pitching from the beginning, it's coming to life, essentially.
Well, yeah, and I want to give credit where credit's due, but we've got a fantastic individual by the name of Joshua Leachman on our team here at Infor that has really been focusing in on this notion of predictive compliance and how important it is and is going to be with our customers, our prospects. And when we say predictive compliance, I think that the mind naturally goes to, okay, I don't want to have some legal ramifications or whatever it may be. That's actually not all we're talking about here. We're talking about compliance of your actual business, and your compliance, your target actually moves over time because you're trying to better those processes, those business rules, those automation flows, whatever it may be. That's what we mean by predictive compliance. If you have all these things in there, the compliance is not just around that data was entered correctly or that it's clean or that something actually finally occurred. It's how it occurred, right? Having all those pieces together are so fundamentally important for you to be able to figure out, hey, how I handle business today may not be how I have to do it tomorrow. And I think it's a fantastic notion. I'm fully, clearly, you guys know, I'm fully bought into you have to have this sort of architecture in multi-tenant cloud to really make a meaningful difference. And obviously that's why we're seeing it such highly valued in the market when companies can have multiples of these.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, this is what Mike will love. It works every day on data architectures and data pipelines and cataloging. The thing is, on the top of the pyramid, what is also very important is that live analytics streaming, nature of process mining. If I go from one screen to the other, or there is a certain workflow running, and that data gets to a central storage, it could be a data lake, but we need almost a live execution of seeing the process. And then think about Google Maps, where I started and there is just a map, and then I switch on traffic, and immediately I can see green, orange, and red. And that's actually the UI I was talking about. A classical BI dashboard won't work. You want this type of UIs. You put your Google Glass on it and you see the augmented reality. I call it the augmented BI almost. And you see the flow of the business process like you defined, but then with this augmented data, right? So that visibility, and as I keep running, and there's a lot of users running the process, that diagram really lives. You see building up like the traffic in the Google Maps, right? So my data pipelining and streaming is very much more important. The classical ETL and scheduling isn't going to make it anymore. I don't think so.
That's actually an interesting analogy that you brought up, by the way. This entire time I'm thinking that you just can't wait until the day that you can actually see, hey, Mike, it took you a long time to get into the office today. How can we optimize that? Yeah,
Big brother.
But, yeah. But
that's why I need process intelligence.
Yeah, Minority Report starring Massimo Capocha.
Yeah.
No, but you know what? That gets into a really, really interesting area, though, because let's take it a step further, right? So what Google and Waze does, which Waze I think is a Google app now, right?
Yeah.
They look at all of the telemetry for cell phones in a given, triangulated area. And they're like, wow, this looks to be moving pretty slow over here. So just a heads up, it's going to take a while to get over there. But what's interesting, though, is that when you start to look at things like Waze and they actually provide you other recommendations, they're exerting a soft influence on the overall system. So yes, if you send enough people a different direction, you actually start to offload some of the congestion in traffic that is already built up ahead of you. And so they're actually influencing people's decisions to optimize their own personal processes and actually take a back road or an alternative highway or a freeway or something like that. So that sort of process intelligence actually can have mass effect on the network so that it actually decreases congestion across the entire system, right? So when you have that sort of information, that sort of intelligence, then you can actually start soft influencing the entire network, whether that's traffic congestion, whether that's city streets and how people move and freely about, or whether that's something like shop floor dynamics or manufacturing lines or something like that. When you understand that sort of process and then you can develop that sort of intelligence, you can actually pull certain levers to kind of change the outcomes of those processes without actually just saying, hey, we need to be more efficient in this X, Y, and Z manufacturing line process, right?
Yeah, or getting
absolutely.
on to an employee. I really love that analogy, Mike, because I wanted to bring this up, and I know we're joking about Minority Report, right? But it kind of leads you down that road of, is what we're trying to do here trying to monitor and better people, or is it systems? And I think it's what you said. It's that softer influence. And that's what we need to keep in our perspective when we're building, when we're implementing, when we're thinking about these systems, is how can it make my business better? It shouldn't be thought of as maybe getting beyond process intelligence here, but like replacing my employees, right? I know that's the whole TCO concept's always going to be there, but the softer influence on, hey, if someone's really busy, it's not like you really want to have a negative effect on their potential career or anything like that, because you don't really know what's going on. But at the same time, if we've got some freed capacity, it should deviate. It should go somewhere else where we've known it's got a route of success, right? Now, maybe I know that feels very manual in our world where it's much more systematic. why can't we have these branches to where things get queued in a certain way to where we know we can process by sending it somewhere else and bypassing that or automatically approving it because the AI is 98.9% certain that this is going to pass through with flying colors, right? That's where this is ultimately going towards.
I really like that because, Rick, I mean, and Mike, in the cloud, people talk about scalability, and infinite capacity. So why is it process mining just provide the process scalability, right? So if I can be, busy with something and I'm at the bottleneck, maybe it just scales to Mike because Mike has more capacity, like a server has capacity or over capacity or under capacity. The same is a process with people and other resources. And so process mining, the automation of, the realization of, okay, there is a bottleneck, but the automation is really just reverting the load to other resources. And that could be people or systems as well, right? So I'm seeing the same technology used in cloud going into the business process mining. And what I like, what Mike used the word telemetry, or forget about my European accents, but I'll do that more in the Latin/Italian, telemetry or telemetry, whatever. I don't actually. I vote to change the name of the product that we are building, data pipelines, to data telemetry, because that's really what people needs to have in the future, real time, data decisions and actions, and not just after the facts, right? In the Formula One, when you have a Grand Prix, you get the telemetry real time to your screen, and you know if the car has issues, if the pilot is driving in a good way on the turns and so on, right? So that is where the world is going, and we talked about in the first episode, consumer technology versus enterprise. We are not at the telemetry level at all yet in the enterprise, right? So, but for process intelligence, will be also important to be at the telemetry, because I want to see my process diagram really real time, drawing and see the bottlenecks and see the resolution as well. The redirecting, the branching of things.
You're going to upset Mike by trying to take over the naming conventions, because he takes that to heart.
He's going to change. He has to change a lot of documentation.
Yeah. You know what? If this episode gets 100 likes and subscribes, we'll change it.
Deal.
Massimo's going to get that now.
Wait,
That's
1,000.
I'm gonna track now the likes. You say 100, eh? Okay, good.
No. We'll come back to that one. Yeah,
100 likes. Okay,
it does bring up an interesting discussion that maybe is for another podcast, though, Massimo and Mike, is that you see a lot of companies, startups, whatever we want to call them these days, that focus on one little narrow thing. It's almost like if you can have the vision that, hey, you know what? My business model is to be bought up by someone, and I know that because they're going to need this, and I'm faster to market with this. It's a really good business model for them. But maybe there's companies out there that have this sort of vision in a lot of different areas to where, hey, at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the connected experience so much more powerful?
It's much, much more powerful. But, and the RPA vendors, they're going to go into low code as well, because they need an environment where to code as well. So if you have a startup with a low code and you do a pretty good job in the first year, you can go and sell it to integration platform, because integration platforms don't have any low code environment, but they need a low code environment, right? So this RPA, API management, process intelligence, low code, people are going to end up to have, composition platforms, where you really can build applications around it. This is a trend that it started, and you see going to be more technologies acquisition. These standalone vendors that can only do one use case, integration or API, that's not going to fly unless you are at the beginning and you do a good job and then you get acquired. But that's the end point, right? So eventually you're going to end up to be part of a platform solution that is going to be all wired together, right? So
I kind of think, I like where I thought about going in that direction, Rick, as well, because I was thinking man, if you didn't get on the GameStop train and invest and make your millions, well, just start a startup for process intelligence. Like someone's going to scoop you up and give you $10 million in a year, right? Like I do wonder, I'm sure that a lot of people in the startup market, they're like, yeah, I love building software. I want to optimize all these things. I want to build a product, bring it to market and so on. But they have no data. They have no visualization, right? They're an independent product that is so heavily dependent on services that really, they may not have started this way, but it typically ends in acqui-hire, right? So they're either acquired or they fold up shop, and then their development team gets acquired into the company that wants to absorb this into their platform, which is actually fine, for the kids at home, graduating out of college. Like, yeah, start a startup, sell it, sell it to somebody, make your millions by the time you're like 22, 23. But yeah, there's not very long legs, I think. And as time goes on, these types of startups will be bred with the intention of basically maturing to the point that it's presentable for acquisition from one of the bigger companies, which, that's an interesting thought, right? Are there going to be new companies, unicorn companies in the future in the enterprise market with that kind of trend?
Yeah. And if you, do you, I always listen, some of the podcasts, and or some, the YouTubes and podcasts
wait, your views do not count. Your likes do not count.
No, that won't count. But there is there is this shareholders value versus customer value, right? So if you are starting a company, you're running a company, what's your culture? Is it a shareholder value or a customer value? And if you are more shareholder value, what is easy then, just go buy and pretend that you have a higher valuation, but you don't have an integrated solution and everything is just, done with surgeries, in the architectures and nothing works. But then it will eventually go to a customer and customer will have to do all the surgeries and integration together. If you'd run a company for a customer value, right? And you do care, you build these capabilities organically. Yeah, you may do some acquisitions, but you do an acquisition in such a way that it fits your architecture. Because a lot of these technology acquisitions can be tricky, because you may buy a technology that doesn't really have a fit at all, and you have to almost rebuild the product or change it completely, that then it was better to build it yourself, right? Or take some open source project and build it yourself. So, and there is this constant battle of partners of technology, but that's because people have a mentality of a shareholder value and not a customer value, right? So that's really a big difference. And I believe in customer value, and I believe of an integrated solution is much better for a customer. Maybe not for a shareholder at the beginning, but for a customer is much value. You can think about Apple. The shares are very high, but that was a result after being customer valued and create an ecosystem of an integrated solution that brought the customer to really love the product, and that has created a shareholder value, right? So that's the sequence people should work if they start a startup. If they start a startup and then bring a VC, and a VC wants to have a shareholder value, they're gonna put them in some whatever acquisition. Yeah, maybe you're gonna get some money, but you're not going to serve the customers.
Yeah, before we spiral into what feels like it's going to be a debate over market valuation and maybe perception versus reality and our thoughts on that, I think we did verify that predictive compliance is a real thing and process intelligence plays a really big role into that. But you have to have a connected solution, right? But guys, I really appreciate the time today. This has been fun. We'll pick it up next week. Until then, thanks everyone for coming on and listening to us. If you have any feedback, let us know. If you have any questions or suggestions on future topics, let us know. And until next time, see you guys.
See you. And hit 100 time.